Hello again, my little literary learners. We're going to continue our study of poetry. And this time, we are going to look at a poem written by Lewis Carroll, who was the same person who did The Crocodile. And this poem and Crocodile came out of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. So that's a pretty important book, and it had some cool stuff in it. Um, the poem is called Father William, and in it has some great examples for what we're going to learn this week. One of those things is called alliteration, and alliteration basically is you take the same beginning letter of a word and repeat it a few different times. So we call that alliteration. The second thing we're going to look at is called repetition. Repetition is exactly what it sounds like. You say something, and you say it again, and then you say it again, and you say it again, and you repeat it. Yeah, moms know a lot about repetition. That is true. So do teachers, in my defense. And then, as usual, as I did last time, it's going to end with an assignment for you guys. But enjoy this one. It's called Father William by Lewis Carroll. And out of my cool teacher book, I'm going to read you a little bit about that. Okay. This poem is absurd dialogue. Absurd dialogue just means it's strange to strange dialogue between a youth and his father in the form of questions and answers, which is kind of a cool way to tell a poem. When the young man speaks, the subject is old age, and when Father William speaks, the subject is youth, which is, I think that's what the authors of this book mean when they say absurd, because the young person is talking about things being old, and the old person is talking about young stuff and things being young. All right, what else do I want to tell you? This is interesting. The poem is recited by Alice in Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. When Alice meets a caterpillar, it tells her the poem is wrong from beginning to end because it is a parody of a well known poem written about the same time the book was, called The Old Man's Comforts and How He Gained Them. And that poem was written by Robert, I think it's pronounced Southey. It looks like Southey, but I bet it's pronounced Southey. So a parody, that's something I'm going to tell you about, but I don't really expect you to know it. A parody is there's something very famous done by one person, and then another person comes along and they sort of take this thing that was the original work and then like twist it around and make it kind of the same thing with a little bit of a difference to it. Okay, now here's the poem.
Father William by Lewis Carroll. You are old, Father William, the young man said, and your hair has become very white, and yet you incessantly stand on your head. Do you think, at your age, it is right? In my youth, Father William replied to his son, I fear it might injure the brain, but now that I'm perfectly sure I have none, why, I do it again and again. You are old, said the youth, as I mentioned before, and have grown most uncommonly fat, yet you turned a back somersault in at the door. Pray, what is the reason of that? In my youth, said the sage, as he shook his grey locks, I kept all my limbs very supple by the use of this ointment, 1 shilling the box. Allow me to sell you a couple? You are old, said the youth, and your jaws are too weak for anything tougher than suet, yet you finished the goose with the bones and the beak. Pray, how did you manage to do it? In my youth, said his father, I took to the law and argued each case with my wife, and the muscular strength which it gave to my jaw has lasted the rest of my life. You are old, said the youth. One would hardly suppose that your eye was as steady as ever, yet you balanced an eel on the end of your nose. What made you so awfully clever? I have answered 3 questions, and that is enough, said his father. Don't give yourself airs. Do you think I can listen all day to such stuff? Be off, or I'll kick you downstairs.
Cool poem, right? I like that one. That is a lot of fun. All right, now I did say we were going to talk about a couple things, alliteration and repetition. We're going to start with alliteration. And I'm going to show it to you. Woo, just like this. There we go. Perfect. So it is a verse from our poem. I wrote the word alliteration so you can see what it's spelled like because it's a tricky one. And once again, alliteration is repeating the first sound of a word a few different times. Like this. You are old, Father William, the young man said, and your hair has become very white, and yet you incessantly stand on your head. Do you think, at your age, it is right? All right, check this out. You are old, Father William, the young man said, and your hair has become very white. So, hair starts with that ha sound. Has also starts with that ha sound. So, that's alliteration. We've got hair has become very white, and yet you incessantly stand on your head incessantly. So we've got this sound. This is actually an example of alliteration that's not at the beginning of a word, and that's okay to have too. incessantly stand on your head. The sounds are examples of alliteration. Incessantly is a cool word too. Nice vocabulary touch here. Incessantly means without ceasing. It just keeps he just keeps doing it. Keeps standing on his head. Incessantly stand on your head. Do you think at your age it is right? All right, those are great examples of alliteration. Same beginning sounds. I keep saying beginning. It's not really beginning. Same sounds being repeated over and over. Okay, so now let's talk about repetition, and I'm going to show you that in a slightly different way. Here we go. And here's where we're going to talk about repetition. All right. So this is a portion of the poem, not the entire thing, because I couldn't fit the whole thing on my screen, but this will give us plenty for what we're going to talk about for repetition. All right, this first verse is the young man. It starts with, "You are old, Father William," the young man said. We're going to look at this part right here. You are old, right there. So then we've got Father William's response in this next part. We're going to skip that for now. We're going to go back. We're going to go down one back to the youth talking, and he starts with, "You are old," said the youth, "as I mentioned before." How about that? So Father Williams, we're going to skip again. We're going to go back down one more to the youth. "You are old," said the youth, "and your jaws are too weak." So that is repetition. We've got the same thing. You are old, you are old, you are old, 3 times every time the youth starts talking. That's what he starts with. Okay, now let's look at what Father William says. "In my youth," Father William replied to his son. And again, "In my youth," said the sage. They called him something different this time, which is pretty cool, as he shook his gray locks. And once again, "In my youth," said his father, "I took to the law." So there's a great example of repetition. We've got the young man, "You are old, you are old, you are old." And we've got Father William's reply, always begins with, "In my youth, and in my youth." All right, friends, and that is repetition. Now let's sum this up, alliteration and repetition, and talk about your assignment. And that's repetition. Okay, so we've got alliteration, which is repeating same sound in a few different words towards the beginning or towards the middle. At the end, we would really call it rhyming. So alliteration is front sounds, middle sounds being repeated, and repetition is saying the same line, phrase again and again and again. Okay, big things in poetry, lots of different poems. Your assignment. I'm going to give you a poem called Dream Variations, and it's written by a man named Langston Hughes, who was a black poet, and that's important for you to know because in the poem he talks about that. If you don't figure that out, it's really confusing. And he was a poet in the 1920s, so very long time ago. Really great poem, and I want you to find examples of alliteration and examples of repetition. They are definitely there. Enjoy the poem, it's pretty cool. And let's see. There we go. I think that's all I have for you. Have a good time. Thanks for enjoying some poetry with me, and I'll see you next time, guys. My little literacy learners.